The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stared at the man I thought I loved, watching him laugh at what I considered the most reasonable request in the world. We were sitting in the rooftop restaurant of the Four Seasons in downtown Seattle, the city lights twinkling below us like scattered diamonds, and I had just asked Ryan to consider signing a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. "A prenup?" Ryan Martinez repeated, his laughter growing louder, causing other diners to glance our way. "Emma, baby, what kind of marriage starts with planning for divorce? That's the most unromantic thing I've ever heard. I'm Emma Blackwood, and I'm 34 years old. I'm also worth approximately $12 million, though Ryan didn't know the exact figure. What he did know was that I owned a successful tech consulting firm, had multiple investment properties, and came from a family with old Seattle money. What he didn't know was that I'd been testing him for months, watching for signs that he was more interested in my bank account than my heart. "It's not about planning for divorce," I said carefully, setting down my champagne. "It's about protecting what we've both built independently and being clear about our financial expectations." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his handsome face still creased with amusement. At 36, he was undeniably attractive, tall, athletic, with dark hair and charming brown eyes that had first caught my attention at a charity gala 18 months ago. He worked as a real estate agent, though his sales record was mediocre at best. What he lacked in professional success, he made up for in confidence and charm. "Emma, sweetie," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I love you for who you are, not what you have. The fact that you'd even suggest a prenup tells me you don't trust me. How can we build a marriage on mistrust?" His words were smooth, practiced, and exactly what I'd been afraid to hear. A man who truly loved me would understand the practical wisdom of protecting assets we'd each worked hard to accumulate. A man who was offended by the suggestion, well, that told me everything I needed to know. "I'm not suggesting we don't trust each other," I replied. "I'm suggesting we be smart about protecting our individual assets." "Individual assets?" Ryan's voice took on a slightly sharper edge. "Emma, when we get married, we're going to be a team. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's how marriage works." I felt a chill run down my spine. Ryan had never explicitly asked about my net worth, but he'd made plenty of comments about my expensive taste and my impressive portfolio. He'd moved into my penthouse apartment 6 months ago, ostensibly to save money for the wedding. But I'd noticed he'd quickly grown accustomed to the lifestyle my money provided. "That's a beautiful sentiment," I said slowly. "But practically speaking, we should both protect what we brought into the relationship." Ryan's expression darkened. "You know what? I'm insulted. I'm insulted that the woman I want to spend my life with thinks I'm some kind of gold digger who's only interested in her money." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the restaurant floor. "Maybe you should think about whether you're ready to be married at all, Emma. Because this isn't how people who love each other behave." With that, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting alone with a $300 dinner bill and a crystal-clear understanding of who I was really dealing with. I didn't follow him. Instead, I sat in that restaurant for another hour, sipping champagne and thinking about the past 18 months. I thought about how quickly Ryan had moved in with me, how he'd gradually stopped paying for dates, how he'd begun making comments about our future that always seemed to center around the lifestyle we'd maintain with my money. I thought about the way he'd casually mentioned wanting to quit real estate and focus on my art, a photography hobby he'd never shown much dedication to. I thought about how he'd suggested we buy a vacation home in Aspen using my credit and down payment, since you're so much better with finances than I am. And I thought about his reaction tonight. Not confusion or a desire to understand my concerns, but immediate defensiveness and manipulation. When I finally got home to my penthouse apartment, Ryan was waiting in the living room, a bouquet of roses in his hands and a sheepish expression on his face. "Baby, I'm sorry," he said, standing up as I entered. "I overreacted. I just love you so much that the idea of a prenup felt like you were planning for our marriage to fail." I took the roses, noting they were from the expensive florist downstairs, charged, no doubt, to my account since Ryan had my credit card for emergency expenses. "I love you too," I said, which was still true despite everything. "But I still think we should discuss a prenup." Ryan's face tightened almost imperceptibly before he forced a smile. "You know what? If it's that important to you, we can talk to lawyers. I just want you to be happy." That night, as Ryan slept beside me, I lay awake formulating a plan. I had 2 months before our wedding, and I intended to use that time to discover who Ryan Martinez really was. If I was wrong about him, if he truly loved me for me, then the prenup discussion would be academic. But if I was right, the next morning, I called my lawyer, my accountant, and my investment advisor. I also called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Marcus Chen, a private investigator who'd helped me with corporate espionage cases when I was building my consulting firm. "Emma Blackwood," Marcus said when I walked into his office in Pioneer Square. "I was wondering when you'd call. I've been reading about your engagement in the society pages. You think I need your services?" I asked, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I think you're too smart to marry someone without doing your homework," he replied. "What do you want to know about Ryan Martinez?" Over the next week, while Ryan and I met with lawyers about prenup terms, Marcus dug into Ryan's background. What he found was illuminating, infuriating, and completely unsurprising. Ryan Martinez had a pattern. In the past 10 years, he'd been engaged 3 times, always to wealthy women, always with lavish weddings planned, and always with the engagements ending abruptly just before the ceremony. Each time, he'd managed to extract significant financial benefits from the relationship: expensive gifts, loans that were never repaid, and access to business opportunities through his fiancé's connections. His most recent ex-fiancée, a pharmaceutical heiress named Victoria Sterling, had discovered Ryan's true nature just 2 weeks before their wedding. She'd found evidence that he'd been systematically transferring money from their joint account to his personal account, planning to disappear after the ceremony. She'd called off the wedding but never pressed charges, too embarrassed by how thoroughly she'd been deceived. Marcus had done more than just uncover Ryan's romantic history. He'd also discovered that Ryan was deeply in debt, credit cards maxed out, back taxes owed, and a gambling problem that had cost him his previous real estate license in California. He'd moved to Seattle specifically to find a new target, using a friend's address to establish residency and create a false impression of stability. "He's a professional con artist," Marcus told me, as we sat in his office, photos and documents spread across his desk. "He's not just interested in your money. He's probably planning to take as much as he can and disappear." I stared at the evidence, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak. The man I'd fallen in love with didn't exist. Ryan Martinez was a carefully constructed character designed to separate me from my wealth. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. I thought about it for a long moment. I could confront Ryan immediately, throw him out, and be done with it. But that would only send him on to his next victim. I could also let him think he was winning, gather more evidence, and then expose him publicly. But that felt petty and potentially dangerous. Or I could do something else entirely. "I want to beat him at his own game," I said finally. Over the next 3 weeks, I began executing a plan that would make Ryan's head spin. The first step was meeting with my financial advisor, Patricia Kim, at her office in the Columbia Center. "Emma, what you're proposing is unusual," Patricia said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "You want to move all your liquid assets into offshore accounts?" "Not offshore," I corrected. "Into a trust structure that makes them completely invisible to someone doing basic financial research. I want Ryan to think I'm much wealthier than I actually am, while simultaneously making my real assets untouchable." Patricia nodded slowly. "We can do that, but it will require some complex legal maneuvering. I have the best lawyers in Seattle," I said. "Money is no object." The second step was more theatrical. I began dropping hints about fictional assets and investments, carefully planting seeds that would grow into Ryan's imagination. I mentioned a family trust worth $50 million that I'd gain access to after marriage. I casually referenced investment properties in Europe and a stake in a tech startup that's about to go public. Ryan's eyes lit up with each fictional asset I mentioned. I could practically see him calculating potential returns in his head. The third step was the most dangerous. I started giving Ryan access to what appeared to be my financial accounts. In reality, they were elaborate decoys set up by my tech team, showing balances that would make his mouth water but containing nothing of value. "Baby," Ryan said one evening as we reviewed wedding expenses. "I had no idea you were this successful. The numbers I saw on your investment account." "Wow," I smiled innocently. "I don't like to talk about money. It makes people weird." "Not me," he said, pulling me closer. "I love you for who you are. The fact that you're also incredibly successful just makes me proud to be your fiancé." The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost admired his skill. Meanwhile, I was systematically moving my real assets into an untouchable trust structure. My penthouse was transferred to a corporation I controlled. My investment accounts were moved to a family trust established years earlier. My business was restructured to protect it from any potential future claims. By the time I was finished, Emma Blackwood appeared to be worth about $2 million in easily accessible assets, enough to live comfortably but not enough to retire on. The other $10 million was locked away in structures that would require years of litigation to access, if they could be accessed at all. 2 weeks before our wedding, Ryan made his move. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something," he said over dinner at our favorite restaurant. "I've been thinking about our future, and I have some ideas about how we can maximize our financial potential as a couple." "Oh?" I said, taking a sip of wine. "What kind of ideas?" "Well, you're incredibly smart about investments, but you're also busy with your business. I've been thinking I could help manage some of our assets. Maybe we could consolidate our accounts, streamline our investments, that kind of thing." I felt my pulse quicken. This was it, the moment he revealed his true intentions. "That's an interesting idea," I said carefully. "What did you have in mind?" Ryan pulled out a folder he'd been carrying. "I've been working with a financial advisor, and he's put together some investment strategies that could really maximize our returns. But they require moving funds around, consolidating accounts, that sort of thing." I looked at the documents he'd prepared. They were sophisticated, professional, and completely designed to give him control over what he thought were my assets. "This is a lot to process," I said. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Ryan said, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. "But if we're going to implement these strategies, we should probably do it before the wedding, for tax purposes." That night, I called Marcus. "He's moving faster than I expected," I told him. "I think he's planning to clean me out before the wedding, not after." "That makes sense," Marcus said. "If he can get control of your assets before you're married, he can disappear without dealing with divorce proceedings." "I need to accelerate my timeline," I said. The next morning, I called Ryan into my home office. "I've been thinking about your investment proposal," I said. "And I think you're right. We should consolidate our finances." Ryan's face lit up. "Really? That's great, baby. I think this is going to be amazing for our future." "I've prepared some documents," I said, handing him a folder. "These will give you access to manage our joint investments." Ryan eagerly signed the papers, not bothering to read them carefully. If he had, he would have discovered that he was signing documents that gave him access to the decoy accounts I'd set up. Accounts that appeared to contain millions, but were actually empty shells. "When can we start moving money around?" he asked. "The accounts should be active by tomorrow," I said. "You'll be able to access everything then." That evening, Ryan was more affectionate than he'd been in months. He cooked dinner, bought expensive wine, and spent the evening talking about our future together. He was practically vibrating with excitement about the financial opportunities ahead. I went to bed that night, knowing it would be the last time I'd sleep next to him. The next morning, I left for what I told Ryan was a business trip to San Francisco. In reality, I checked into a hotel across town and waited for Marcus to call. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. "He's taken the bait," Marcus said. "Ryan accessed the accounts an hour ago and started transferring funds. He's moved what he thinks is $8.5 million into his personal accounts. And the transfers have triggered the security protocols we set up. The bank is treating it as potential fraud, which technically it is. They've frozen all the accounts pending investigation." I felt a grim satisfaction. "What about the backup plan?" "Also in motion. Ryan's real estate license has been suspended pending investigation into his background. The California Gaming Commission has also filed a complaint about his unpaid gambling debts. And Victoria Sterling has agreed to press charges for the money he stole from her." "And the wedding?" "The venue has been notified that the wedding is canceled. The deposits have been refunded to your account. The vendors have been paid and released from their contracts." I sat in my hotel room for a long time, processing everything. In the span of 24 hours, I'd gone from engaged to single, from victim to victor. Ryan Martinez had thought he was playing a sophisticated con game, but he'd been outplayed by someone who understood the game better than he did. My phone started ringing around 4 p.m. Ryan's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Emma, thank God," Ryan's voice was panicked. "Something's wrong with the accounts. I can't access any of the money, and the bank is saying there's a fraud investigation." "That's terrible," I said calmly. "Have you called your lawyer?" "I don't have a lawyer. Emma, you need to fix this. This is your money, your accounts. You need to call them and straighten this out. Actually, Ryan, I think you should know something. Those weren't my real accounts." There was silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "I mean, those accounts were decoys, empty shells designed to look like they contained my assets. When you tried to steal from them, you triggered security protocols that flagged the activity as fraud." "You're lying." "I'm really not. I've also canceled our wedding, moved out of the penthouse, and transferred all my actual assets into structures you can't touch. Oh, and I've contacted the police about your outstanding warrants in California." The silence stretched longer this time. "Emma, baby, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted. "I know exactly who you are, Ryan. I know about Victoria Sterling, about your gambling debts, about the other women you've conned over the years. I know you never loved me. You loved my bank account." "That's not true." "It is true. And now you're going to face the consequences." I hung up and turned off my phone. Over the next few days, I learned what had happened to Ryan through Marcus's reports. He'd been arrested trying to access the frozen accounts, charged with attempted fraud and identity theft. The investigation had uncovered his pattern of targeting wealthy women, and Victoria Sterling wasn't his only victim willing to testify. His bail was set at $500,000, money he obviously didn't have. His real estate license was permanently revoked, and several of his creditors, learning about his arrest, had begun collection proceedings. Within a week, Ryan Martinez went from thinking he was about to become a multi-millionaire to sitting in a jail cell, facing multiple felony charges and financial ruin. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd mocked my prenup request, laughed at the idea of protecting assets in a marriage, and dismissed my concerns about financial security. Now he was discovering exactly why those protections matter. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office. I'd sold the penthouse and bought a smaller, more secure home in Capitol Hill, when Marcus called with an update. Ryan Martinez pleaded guilty to fraud and attempted theft charges, he told me. He's been sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. How much restitution? About $1.2 million total, money he obviously doesn't have. I felt no satisfaction in Ryan's downfall, but I felt no pity either. He'd made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. What about the other women he targeted? Victoria Sterling has started a support group for victims of romance scams. She's also working with law enforcement to identify and prosecute other con artists using similar tactics. That intrigued me. Put me in touch with her. A week later, I met Victoria for coffee at a small cafe in Fremont. She was about my age, with short blonde hair and intelligent green eyes that held a wariness I recognized in my own mirror. "I'm glad you reached out," she said, as we settled into a corner booth. I felt so stupid when I discovered what Ryan was doing. I kept thinking I should have seen the signs earlier. "You weren't stupid," I said. "You were in love with someone who didn't exist. Ryan Martinez is a skilled manipulator who's been perfecting his techniques for years." Victoria nodded. "That's what the FBI agent told me. Apparently these romance scams are more common than people realize. The victims are often successful, intelligent women who are targeted specifically because they have assets worth stealing. What are you doing about it?" "I'm working with a group that helps victims of financial fraud. We're also pushing for stronger laws around romance scams and better resources for victims." I made a decision that surprised even me. I want to help. Over the following months, Victoria and I became unlikely allies in the fight against romance scams. I used my tech expertise to help develop better screening tools for dating apps and social media platforms. Victoria used her pharmaceutical industry connections to fund research into the psychology of financial fraud. We also started speaking at events, sharing our stories to help other women recognize the warning signs we'd missed. It was therapeutic, turning our painful experiences into something that could help others. The most rewarding part was the letters we received from women who'd recognized their own situations in our stories and had taken action to protect themselves. Some had discovered their boyfriend's true intentions and ended relationships before losing money. Others had uncovered debt or deception they might never have found otherwise. "We're probably preventing millions of dollars in fraud," Victoria told me one evening as we reviewed thank you letters from women we'd helped. "More importantly," I said, "we're helping people avoid the emotional trauma of discovering the person they love doesn't exist." As for Ryan Martinez, he served his full sentence and was released 2 years later. I heard through Marcus that he'd tried to contact me several times, but I'd blocked all his attempts. Some stories don't need epilogues. The prenup request that had started everything became a cornerstone of my new approach to relationships. I was dating again, carefully, with full background checks and clear financial boundaries. But I was also much more aware of the warning signs I'd ignored with Ryan. "You know," Victoria said to me recently, "we should be grateful to Ryan in a weird way. He taught us both to trust our instincts and protect ourselves." "I'd rather have learned those lessons without losing 2 years of my life to a con artist," I replied. "True. But think about how many other women might have learned those lessons the hard way if we hadn't shared our stories." She had a point. My experience with Ryan had been painful, but it had also given me a deeper understanding of financial security, personal boundaries, and the importance of trusting my instincts. The money Ryan had tried to steal was still safe in my trust accounts. My business was thriving. My investments were performing well. And I was sleeping better at night, knowing that I'd never again be vulnerable to someone who confused my love with my bank account. The prenup request that Ryan had mocked as unromantic had actually been the most romantic thing I could have suggested, a way to ensure that any future relationship would be based on genuine love rather than financial opportunism. These days, when I talk to young women about relationships and money, I always emphasize the same point. Protecting your assets isn't about planning for failure. It's about ensuring that your success, however you define it, remains yours to share by choice rather than by force. Ryan Martinez had taught me that lesson the hard way, but he'd also taught me something else. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when someone mocks your reasonable request for financial protection, they're telling you everything you need to know about their true intentions. In the end, I didn't just vanish my money and watch him lose everything. I vanished his entire con game, protected other women from falling victim to the same scheme, and built a life based on authenticity rather than deception. That's a much better ending than any wedding Ryan Martinez could have given me. The Seattle penthouse where Ryan had lived off my success was sold to a young couple who genuinely loved each other. My new home in Capitol Hill was smaller, but filled with people who cared about Emma Blackwood, the person, not Emma Blackwood, the bank account. And the $12 million that Ryan had tried to steal? It was still growing, still protected, and still mine to do with as I pleased. Some of it went to the anti-fraud foundation Victoria and I had started. Some of it went to supporting other women entrepreneurs. And some of it went to a very nice vacation to celebrate my escape from the biggest financial mistake I'd almost made. The prenup request that had started it all was framed in my office, a reminder that sometimes the most important word you can say in a relationship is no. Ryan Martinez had mocked that word, dismissed it, and tried to manipulate me into ignoring my own instincts. But in the end, that single word, no, had saved me from losing everything to someone who'd never loved me at all. And that, I thought, was worth more than any amount of money he could have stolen.